Welcome back to the Gem Cutter's Craft. This is Justin K. Prim, and today we're going to be doing a review of the KMT Som machine. If you've been following along on my faceting adventures, then you probably saw me unbox this Jambpeg Faceting machine back in December, and I have been getting so many messages on when are you going to review it? Well, it took a while for me to get back to a place where I could actually sit down and set it all out, but finally I am here on this beautiful day, and we are going to cut a gemstone on the KMT Som and look at every aspect of the machine, all of the features, all the included bits, and the pros and the cons that I can discover in cutting one stone. So let's get to it. So if you haven't seen the unboxing video that I did back in December, then you probably don't know all of the cool stuff that comes with this machine. So let's just walk through it really quick before we look at how the machine works. So aside from the base, the Jambpeg head, and the water drip, the machine also comes with a bunch of accessories. A couple of cutting laps, which is a 1200 topper, a 1500 topper, an 8-inch master lap, the instruction manual, a bunch of the Jambpeg dops, an extra water drip hose, a couple of Allen wrenches, a replacement speed controller knob, a replacement belt for under the machine, and a bunch of heads for one of the types of dop sticks. So the machine comes with two types of dops. One of them is just the regular pointy tip, and the other one has a removable tip that you can remove and then interchange with all of these different tips. For today's review, I'm not going to be using the removable tip version, but instead I'll just use the standard 8-sided Jambpeg with the single dop piece. So just to see some of the built-in features, we've got a speed controller that goes between forward and fast speeds. We've got a clockwise and counterclockwise. And then if we look over here on the side, underneath the power is the power switch. The machine also comes with this transfer block. So this is for dopping, for aligning, and we're going to see how this works as we go. It also comes with a wastewater tube that I've got going down into an old water bucket. For this review, I'm going to be using 3 laps, the 100 centered, the 600 centered, and my favorite polishing lap of all, the tin lead lap. To test out the machine, I'm going to be cutting this pink tourmaline into a rectangular baguette shape. Now it must be said before we get started that I am not a very good Jambpeg cutter. I know the mast machine very well, I know the handpiece machine very well, but this type of machine is one that I am still learning. So this is not going to be a review of my skills using this machine, because that would be very unfair to the machine. But I do think that I have enough skills and experience with this type of machine that I should be able to do a pretty decent rectangle, and in the process just see how the machine works, which is really what we're trying to find out here. If you haven't seen this type of Jambpeg before, let's look at some of the different features that the machine includes. So we've got a height controller knob, so this makes the whole thing go up and down. We've got a cheater that makes the whole head go left and right, allowing us to adjust our index or cheat our index. We've got a series of holes here that will allow our Jambpeg dop to be inserted and to choose a hole which will make an angle. So the stick has to go into one of these holes, and then the 8-sided index gear on the stick will rest against this piece. Now in the normal function of this part comes off. So our Jambpeg stick has to go into one of these holes, and then we put the 8-sided index gear against the plate, and that gives us our index and our angle, which allows us to cut the stone. So if we choose a lower hole, we're choosing a lower angle. If we choose a higher hole, we're choosing a steeper angle. And then if we look over on the side here, we can see that these holes will actually allow us to cut our girdles in for the emerald cut or any kind of rectangular or geometric shape. We can move the whole mast forward and back by twisting the base, and moving it backwards and forwards, then tightening it. That allows us to move the whole thing closer or further away from our lap. This window opens here, so when we're cutting our girdles, we can lower it down and we're not splashing everything. And then when we're not cutting the girdles, we move this back over, and the splash guard is protecting everything from being splashed. Now finally, when we want to cut our table in, we need to add this little extra extension. So we just stick this in these two holes, snaps right on, and now we can take our dop, put it against the table adapter, and lock it into the index system down here, and that gives us a 90-degree angle. Now if we want to adjust the table, because we see that the table's coming in crooked, we can turn this knob here, and that's pushing this thing forwards and backwards, so that will tilt the table forward and backwards, which is something that's going to be very handy, I think, especially in my Jambpeg amateur hands. Finally, we have the water tank. This can turn around and point the water drip at any place on the lap that we want to. We can adjust it here, and then when we want to turn the water on, all we need to do is turn this lever, and that will give us our drip. The machine can be run in both 110 and 220 mode, so if you're in America or Europe, this machine's going to work for you. You do need to flip the machine up on its side, and there's a switch that you can turn on the speed controller that will actually do that adjustment. So while the machine does include a lot of accessories, it doesn't include a few things that we need to get started. So first of all, I've added my own light. So this is just an LED gooseneck light that I like to use. So I added that myself. It does come with its own water tube that's fixed in, so that's down and set up. And it doesn't come with a US power plug. However, this is pretty easy to solve because this is just a normal computer type cable. So I just switched it out with one that I had laying around, and that's all I needed to do to make it work for US power, aside from flipping that switch underneath to 110 volts. So having looked at all the features now, the height control, the height lock knob, the cheater knob, the table adapter adjuster, and the table adapter itself, which just pops off like this, we are now ready to try the machine out and cut a gemstone. So to get started, the first thing that we need to do is to dop our stone. Now, unlike a American style dop, these ones have a plastic ring that does not come off. The whole indexing system is built into the dop, and as far as I can tell, these don't get removed. So we're going to dop it with this plastic bit on here. Now, I am going to prep this dop for the first time, so this hasn't been dopped before. So I need to heat up the dop, I need to heat up my wax, and I'm going to cover the tip of this with wax. And we need a lot of wax because this is a pretty big stone for this little dop tip. Now, once I've got my stone dopped and I'm happy with the waxing, I want to align it with this table adapter. So I'm going to stick it in here, and I'm just going to flatten this natural shape. Now, if I wasn't working with such a nice crystal shape that's already in the perfect shape for a rectangular baguette, I would have preformed this first and then dopped it. But since it's already flat where I want to put the table, it's already rectangular, and the bottom was already kind of pointy, this is really a perfect stone for the design that I want to do. And this thing just allows the stone to align at a 90-degree angle with the dop, so I don't have to worry about, is my stone straight? So I'm happy with this dopping. Once the wax is fully cool, we can get started with cutting the stone. So now we've got our stone dopped up. I've got my mast down, and what I'm going to do is stick the dop into the lowest hole. I've got the index gear aligned to the plate, and that looks to be, let's see, I want to get it to a horizontal. Yeah, that looks pretty straight. So let's turn the machine on. Let's get our water going. And I've got my splash guard door open, and I'm going to cut my girdle. Now I've got it on a slow speed because I'm just testing it out right now. I've never used this before. I have no idea how it's going to work. Okay, I think I need to go a little faster than that. And maybe I should spin it the other way so no water splashing my way. Okay, so let's try that again. Back to the lowest hole. Index is flat against here. This is the 100 grit lap, so this is my preforming lap. Should make fast work of the edge of the stone. And then as soon as the side's totally flat, which it is, I'm going to flip it to the opposite side and cut this one. Okay, so I now have two sides of my rectangle done. I'm going to go and do these two sides. So now I've got to find a new index hole. So I'm going to choose one that's a bit higher. That's too high. I want my dop to look horizontal, and I think that's the one. And again, I'm just looking for a flat face. This one has a bunch of little cracks in it, so I have to cut a little deeper on that one. If you have this thing screwed all the way tight, it creates a vacuum in there that won't drip. So okay, this thing's loosened now. Let's get the drip going better. Now, even though I'm a total newbie at doing this, it feels pretty comfortable so far. I have an idea about how this system works because I've used a system like this in Thailand before, but I have only cut a couple stones on it, and my hand dexterity feels very clumsy right now just because I'm not used to it. Okay, so that's four sides of our rectangle. Now, being a crown first cutter, usually what I like to do is cut the four sides of the crown and then cut the table. So let's see how the table adapter works. So we're going to stick this thing on here. Let's turn this off for a second so we can get situated. So we're going to have to raise this up a bunch because this thing's going to have to go in here and it's too low right now. Okay, so that should be enough. And then this thing needs to come a bit closer. So I'm over my lap. So now I will put this in here, line it all up this way. And so I'm keeping some pressure pushing forward here so that we get leverage and everything stays. So let's see if I can do this in the first try. And so now I'll close my splash guard door so I don't get the table all messy, and we'll come down and cut a table. Okay, so we now have a rectangle, four-sided, perfectly straight because I've used the index gear to make it. And we've got a flat table that's totally perpendicular to the dop. We know it's perpendicular because I used that thing to align it, and then I've used this thing to keep everything straight. So that's all that I need to do for my 100 grit lap. So if we want to switch laps, we need to use this Allen key. We'll loosen this up. Now this system is a little bit different than most of the American styles where you can just twist it with your hand. This one you can't really use your hand because it needs an Allen key. So okay, 100 grit's done. Everything else I'm going to do is going to be on the 600 grit because this is my proper cutting lap. So stick this back in here and tighten it down. And actually it's pretty fast and easy to change these, so that's not really a big deal that I have to use the Allen key. So now I guess I'm going to touch the table again real quick just so it's at 600 grit. And let's go back and do the table again so it's not on my preforming grit. So I'm just keeping some pressure on the dop to make sure it stays forward. I've never used a table cutting system like this, so I assume that I'm using it right. It seems to make sense this way. And then if I needed to adjust my table and polishing, I could use this thing. Okay, the table's totally flat and now it looks more silky than it does coarse, which is what I like about the 600 lap. So now the table's done. We'll take this thing off and let's start cutting some facets. Okay, so we want to figure out an angle to cut our crown mains on. This is the part that I really don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just going to rough guess. If I was gonna use this machine full time, I think probably what I would do is get one of those art protractors that's like a half circle, set it on the lap, and then I could figure out exactly what angle I want my dop to be at. But I'm just gonna eyeball it. I want the angle to be about 35 degrees, so if I know this is 90 and this is 0, then that's about 45, and 35 is just slightly higher than that. So I'll just eyeball it, which is, I think, how they normally do it. So I'm going to go for hole number 15, and let's see what happens here. So we'll turn this thing back on, get the water going, hole 15, lining up the indexes here, and I'm just cutting it in. And I think I'm going to go slightly steeper than that. So let's try hole 16. So probably once you've cut a few stones on this, you kind of get into an idea about which holes to use. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's do the other side at hole 16. So okay, that's pretty good for now. They're only cut in a little bit. Now I want to do the two ends. So I'm going to cut those also at hole 16. So it's pretty easy for me, even as a newbie, to set my angle, put my index pretty securely against the plate, and cut where I want to cut. I've not really used this style much before, and it's coming pretty quickly. So now I'm going to get out my loop and just start to make sure that everything is totally to the same depth, and I can see that it's not, so I will go back and adjust some of my facets. And with the index gear system, it's very easy to go back and find the facets that you already cut. The other type of Jambpeg that I've used, aside from the Thai version, is the British version, and in that type of Jambpeg, there is no indexing system. It's just a stick in your hand, and it's pretty hard to go back and find your facets. I mean, it's really about you feeling it on the lap and your hand control. So this makes it a lot easier for me as somebody who's not very good at this to find the facets that I'm looking for, even though I feel like I'm a little clumsy and slow right now finding the holes and everything, but I'm sure all that stuff comes with practice. So I'm just going around and making all my girdles to the same depth so that my girdle line is meeting all the way around. So I'm seeing that some of my facets are coming in crooked as I go around and cut my crown main. So I'm going to go back and just touch each one of the girdles, because I feel like some of my girdles facets maybe are not as flat as I thought they were, and it's making everything look a little bit skewed. Also, I haven't touched the girdle facets on the 600 lap, so this is a good chance to do that. But I'm just going around and seeing, is there some error that I've made, because everything looks a little bit twisted as I try to make my meet points on the end. So let me just touch these again and make sure I really did them correctly. So now here's the tricky part. I started on hole 16 at a certain height. I lowered the height to be able to cut the girdles in. Now I'm going back to cut those crown facets again, and I don't know how high this is supposed to be to make 16 be the same number as before. So I'm just going to try and cut a little bit and eyeball it, and I can see now I'm way too low. So we'll come back up a bit. Even higher, that's too low on the facet. So this is going to be an interesting experience, because now instead of me using my angles as a reference point to do everything, which is what I'm used to, it's going to be more about looking at the stone, testing and finding everything. So now I'm going back and rebalancing my facets to make the girdle line straight. Okay, so everything's coming in a little bit twisted still, And that's telling me, if I was using my normal handpiece machine, that would be telling me that my handpiece is out of balance. Now, I'm not sure if I was meant to balance this thing in any certain way before I started. Probably should have looked at the manual first. But I know what I need to do to fix the problem, which is to use the cheater. And I need to go a little bit this way. So I'm going to try and just go one whole line and see if that fixes my problem. Now again, I have not been trained on this machine, and I am literally making up my whole technique on how to do this, so I might be doing this totally wrong, but this video is not about me cutting a stone on here, it's about how the machine works. So after spending a little bit of time going around adjusting the crown, adjusting the table, and cutting in the second tier, I have it finished. But what I have discovered in that process is this thing needs to be balanced before you start working, which is not something that I did before I started cutting the stone. So I think everything's balanced now, but basically what I found is to get a level table and to get all the facets to come in straight, this head has to be about 1.5 lines to the left of what I thought was the center, and this table adjuster has to be about one line forward, otherwise the table was tilted. So now I've got the whole thing done. It's looking pretty straight. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close, and I know that in polishing I'll be able to tweak this out. So we are ready to go on to polishing. So let's switch some things. Okay, so we're going to go back to our main facets and try to get everything polished. So that was 16, and I'm just going to do a little test. So with my lead tin lap, I'm using two bands of diamonds. So I've got 8,000 on the outside, 60,000 on the inside. So if I'm going to have a 2-band lap, I need to find the place where the mast sits that I can reach both tiers, both rings. So this is something that I have not done before, which is polishing 2 bands on the lap with a Jambpeg. So normally I'm cutting on this part of the lap, but now I'm going to have to use this part of the lap so I can reach both bands from the same setting. But it seems to work pretty good in that spot. So let's try the other side. Okay, so I've got all of the tiers polished, and I'm just going to do the table now. And I've got to remember, did I polish this way or this way? I think it was that way, and I assume that you need to do it the same way for cutting and polishing. At least that's how it is on every other machine I've ever used. So let's try this. Okay, that looks pretty good. I got one little tiny extra facet because I made a little mistake and actually had the stone a little bit at a weird angle, but all in all, pretty good. Everything looks to be pretty straightened out. Let's do the final polish. Okay, so the crown is totally polished. That was pretty easy. I didn't really have to do any special extra work. So I've taken the stone off the dop, flipped it over, put it back on the same dop. Now this is not the way that I normally do my gemstone cutting, because usually when I flip it over I use glue. But since these dops are pointy on the end, I guess that technique that I'm normally using is not going to work for this machine, but that's okay. I just used glue and I flipped it and I just basically eyeballed it to make sure that the stone is straight. I'm not sure if you can use this thing to do the transfer. Again, something that I need to learn myself, but that's me, not the machine. So we're going to go ahead and cut the pavilion of the stone, do all the 4 sides. bring it to a point, and see what we can do. We'll do a couple of steps, maybe 3 steps, just to get an authentic experience. Now, since I didn't preform this, I don't know if I can really hit the critical angle of tourmaline, and I also don't know what my angles are, so I'm really going to have to eyeball it and just try to make it steep enough, and see what I can do. But again, this is me learning how to use this machine at the same time. So I've got my cutting lap back on here. Let's see what we can do. So first thing I got to figure out is, where do I start? I think this thing's going to have to go up quite a bit. The other thing that I have to figure out really quickly is, I've got a square that is not aligned to the sides of this stone, so I think I'm going to have to cheat it a bit to get everything lined up. But that'll happen when I start making my first cuts. So I've just finished the whole pavilion. I've got 3 tiers. Now, when I did my transfer, my stone broke because I had an inclusion inside, and if I would have preformed it, which is something that I normally do, that would have come out, but I lost a little bit of my rectangle, so now I've pretty much turned into a square. So I had to recut that one side, which made it a little bit crooked. Again, I'm not going for a perfect stone here. I'm just trying to make sure that the machine works, or see how the machine works, and so far it's working really, really well. I've been able to cut in all my facets, polish all my facets on the crown, do the transfer, learn a couple skills along the way, and I'm starting to get pretty comfortable with finding my angles and just using this stick. Now, because I'm cutting such a simple cut, I haven't had the opportunity or the need to use the indexing system here, but that's okay. I'm just going to keep on as I'm doing and polish these 3 tiers, finish the stone, and then we'll give this machine a final thought and maybe a secondary commentary to give us a little bit more insight into how this machine works on a long term. So as we go through the review of this video, I thought, wouldn't it be great to talk to somebody who's used the machine for longer than I have? So I'm on a Zoom call with Donald Laufer, who has taken the exact same KMT Jambpeg head and put it into his own hand crank bench. So, hi Donald. How long have you been using your KMT Som so far?
Oh, about 2 years now. Oh, very different than the traditional faceting machines. Well, let's say that I'm trying to cut more like a modern design, more like a modern masthead faceting machine, but using a Jambpeg. So I'm using a protractor just to tell me the angles that I'm working at least as closely as possible. I'm also sometimes preforming the stone on a regular masthead and then transferring it to one of the dop sticks that comes with the machine and getting things centered that way. And also, I'm visually trying to cut them all the same size so that I don't have a wavy girdle. And I also use a transfer block, as I would with a mass machine, to transfer the stone from cutting the crown in the pavilion to the pavilion. Lining it up by eye is certainly something I do all the time, and I would have no problems doing it that way either. More of a novelty idea of mine for several years of making one that would hand crank, and it would be a Jambpeg. And I just had this idea to put a hand crank to it, and drew a couple of pictures on paper and went at it with the drills and the table saw. And I went around the shop picking up some old bearings and other lapidary stuff that I've got boxes of. And I even took the handle off my mother's old meat grinder. And that's what I use to turn all the wheels. This one here comes with the machine. It's kind of limited, but the other one that I got from France, that has a lot of slots in there that would act as index gears. And you can
Okay.
get one that's divisible by 3 as well as by 8, like this one here. But this one only has 8 sides. It would be nice if he made one with 10 sides or 12 sides.
And so you're just using the French one then to get more divisions inside of the 8, right? It's not about the quality of the stick.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the quality is about the same, but I have a lot more divisions on this one. It's still working pretty much as it did, or exactly as it did when I first got it. Nothing is worn on it. There's plenty of adjustments here and there to use as a cheater or a micro height adjustment so that I get my facets to line up the way I want them, especially from the cutting labs to the polishing lab.
Thank you so much for, giving me some more feedback and a longer term perspective on the KMT machine. I really appreciate.
You're welcome.
So I've now finished my stone, little tourmaline here, nice square. Not the best stone I ever cut, but again, I've never used this machine before, and I'm really not very good at cutting the Jambpeg style. That being said, I'd like to just talk about my experience using the machine as a newbie, because I think that is actually the really important thing to take away from this. So, as somebody who's only cut a couple stones this way and has had a limited training on how to use this machine, it was surprisingly easy to use. Now, I'm saying this as somebody who's been cutting gemstones for 10 years. I know how a faceting machine is supposed to work. So to figure this one out based on what I know of other types of machines wasn't too tricky, and I was able to do a pretty decent stone. Now, the stone broke in half, and it's an included tourmaline, so it isn't my best stone. And if I was going to be cutting regularly on this machine, I already have some ideas of things that I would do to change my technique and also to understand what my actual angles are. As I said, using one of those half circle protractors and setting on the lap so I could see exactly where my stick is in regards to angles, because my tourmaline is a little bit windowed because I was just guessing on my angles. But again, I didn't really care for that stone. I just wanted to see how the machine worked. So I want to go through the machine bit by bit and talk about my experience and what I think is good and what I think is less than good. So the base itself, the whole machine together is about just under 50 pounds. I think it's about 46 pounds. So this is a pretty heavy machine. So for me, as someone who's traveling all over, this is way too heavy for me to take around and use in the different places that I need to use it. But I'm probably not the ideal subject for that. If you're just going to buy this machine and have it in your studio at home, the weight of the machine really doesn't matter. 46, 50 pounds. It's a very sturdy machine. We can see the aluminum top. I think it's anodized. It feels really high quality. It's not something that seems like it's going to chip. And it was really easy for me to just take a paper towel and wipe the slurry away. It's not like a paint that gets sticky and all this stuff. So I would say the build quality of the base seems to be really, really good. The wood is really sturdy. The base plate seems to be really tough, well anodized. And the speed controller, the only thing that I would really complain about is the knob right here. I don't know, it feels a little bit cheap and flimsy. They give you a backup one, but it just seems like kind of a cheap knob. But that's probably an easy mod if you wanted to do it, or maybe it's fine. I don't know. I'd love to talk to somebody who's used this for a year or two and see how they feel about this knob. I think the switching system over here, the power system, is fine. It's great, and the fact that you can switch from 110 to 220 by flipping that switch on the bottom, super great, because there's so many machines that only work in 110 or 220, and you need to get a step down or step up converter to be able to use them. That makes this really cool for an international perspective. Now, that's just the base. I think when we're talking about the actual Som head, so just this bit here, this thing I think seems pretty well done. I know how to adjust my facets to come in straight, and this gives me all the controls I need. You know, being able to use the cheater to tilt left and right, being able to use the height control to go up and down, and then when cutting the table, being able to really fine adjust the table between back and front and left and right with the cheater. I can't imagine that there's anything more that could be built into this thing. The manufacturing quality seems to be really well done. I didn't have any troubles using it as a newbie, and I think if I would use this long term, which I want to use this long term, I think this is an appealing machine to me as I move into my Jambpeg journey. The fact that you got the little holes down here to be able to cut your girdle, to me this was so easy to use, so intuitive, and it just works all the way up, you know. And then having the table adapter built right in means this is the only piece that you need. You don't need another thing to cut the table or another thing to cut the girdle. They really thought of everything here, and it feels well done. I mean, I've only used it for 2 days, so I can't say on the long term, but it seems to be well done. And I know that other people have just taken this Som head and put it into a pre-existing bench, whether that be a electric commercial setup or a more of a bespoke hand crank thing. You know, we've seen people using this, and it seems to be pretty well tested at this point. One thing that I would like to know in moving forward is, how am I supposed to calibrate this to know where is the 0 for the cheater, where is the 0 for the table? Because as I found, the line that looks like it's the 0 for the cheater was not where I found the 0 to be as far as getting flat facets, and the same said for the table cutter. One of the things that I realized pretty quickly in using this is it's so much more free and loose compared to a mast or even a handpiece machine. The fact that we don't have hard angles, the fact that everything is very fluid means there is a huge learning curve for the beginner. I don't think that I would recommend this to somebody who's a newbie faceter, who doesn't have any training and who doesn't have a teacher. This is not really the kind of machine that you're going to teach yourself. I think you could teach yourself, but it's going to be a lot harder of a journey. And the fact that there aren't that many resources for Jambpeg cutting, you know, there's no online classes, there's not very many websites to learn the skills. I think this would be probably the hardest way for a person to get into it. That being said, if you already know how to cut Jambpeg, or you already know how to cut and you want to transition into Jambpeg, this seems to be a good machine. And at $1,700, which is what the website says, $1,700 plus shipping, that's a very competitive price. I mean, if we look at the cheapest mass machines now that are made in America, you're talking about $3,500. So this is half the price of that. If you're talking about the cheapest, well-done handpiece machine, you know, whether it's the Raytech Shaw in America or the Sterling in Sri Lanka, you know, the good handpieces, you know, they're around 2,000 and up. So this is kind of in that same price point, you know, right under $2,000. With the shipping, it's probably about $2,000. And this is probably, from what I can see of the build quality, this is probably a lifetime machine. This isn't the kind of machine where you're going to buy it until you break it and then get a new one. It seems like it's going to last. My only little quirks here, this water drip system works pretty well. It just sits right in there, but I don't really like this actual piece of metal. It's not very easy to get a very fine, slow drip. You kind of got to play with it. I mean, it works, it's fine, but for me personally, I'd probably see if I could replace this one metal bit. I also don't really like these kind of flexi things. They tend to break, and if you start moving them around too much, you can pull it off. But, you know, whatever, that's just me. This doesn't come with a light, so as I said, I added my own gooseneck, but you know, that's 30, 40, 50 bucks, and then you can get the one that you actually want. So maybe it's actually a good thing that it doesn't come with a light. I'd rather not have a light than have a bad light, because a bad light just isn't very useful, and I really would want to put, you know, one that matches my desk, that matches the height that I need. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about here is the mechanical stick. Now, I never really considered before that in the Jambpeg setup, the mechanical stick is quite important. If this thing isn't built well, then your facets are not going to come out correctly, because it's really the shape and the flatness of the index gear here that's going to determine how straight your facets are. Now, one thing that I noticed as I was cutting this, at one point I turned this index gear to another number, which rotates my stone versus the 8 sides, and I realized that when I went to go polish, my sides weren't lining up anymore, which to me was a bit of a red flag. I mean, this thing should be built so well that every single side is exactly the same, every single index is exactly the same. So if I flip my stone between one side and the other side, or if I flip this thing around between one side and the other side, it shouldn't affect the facets if the facets are just a straight line. And I saw that the facets were noticeably off, and I had to put this index gear back to its original number, which tells me that these 8 sides probably aren't perfectly flat, or they're not perfectly the same. And the fact that it's plastic already kind of makes me a little bit nervous. Now, the good thing is, if these things aren't great, you can buy different ones. You know, I know in France, where these were originally developed, this whole piece is metal and there's no plastic bits on here. So this plastic bit is kind of an economy version of these mechanical sticks. I would not want to say, after only cutting one stone, whether these sticks are the best they can be, but I have a feeling that they might not be the best. But the good thing is, if you've bought this whole machine, or if you buy this whole machine, you can buy these metal sticks from other manufacturers that are probably still going to work on this machine, because the stick is the stick. If I was going to make this my full-time machine, I would probably try some of the sticks that some of the French manufacturers are making and see how different they are, because I'm not totally convinced that the plastic stick is a long-term solution. Maybe the fact that they're giving you 10 sticks means you might use them and change them. I'm not really sure how the longevity of the stick is, but that would probably be my biggest critique, is I'm not sure how long those sticks are going to last, or how straight they really are. This block, this tabling block, seems to be really good. It was really easy for me to put my stone in here when the dop was hot, and move the stone to make sure that my table was totally flat. If I had preformed my stone, I would definitely want to make sure that my preformed table is perfectly flat against here, so that I know it's at a 90-degree angle with the dop. And it seemed pretty easy to do that. The only thing that I didn't know how to do was how to align my stone, you know, because it was a rectangle. I want it to be perfectly aligned with these two sides. And I almost kind of think, if this thing wasn't round, but instead actually had 3 facets cut into it, so this thing would perfectly fit in there like an indexed transfer thing, you would really maybe be able to use it in a different way. But maybe there's just a technique that I'm missing here, or maybe I just need to get better at aligning my stone by eye to the index gear. So all in all, I had a great experience using this KMT Som. I think I can definitely recommend the machine if you are looking for a way to get into the world of Jambpeg cutting. This is definitely a way to do it. Now, I will say that I did not buy this machine. KMT sent this to me to do this review, and I want to thank them for sending me that. However, they didn't give me any kind of guidance or expectations on what I should say. In fact, they didn't tell me anything at all. They just said, here's the machine, go for it. So everything that I've done and learned and said in this video is my own opinions, and I stand by them. I do think that this is a great machine. The price is right, the build quality is right, the features are correct, and it seems like anyone that wanted to learn Jambpeg could do it with this machine. Now, if you are one of those people that wants to get into the world of Jambpeg cutting like myself, I definitely recommend that you should check out the Jambpeg Facetors users group on Facebook. I'm going to put a link in the video description, as well as a link to the KMT website. I built this Facebook group for people like myself that want to learn how to do Jambpeg cutting and want to talk to other people in the Jambpeg world to learn all of these tips and tricks and techniques, some of which I have discovered that I need to learn myself here. So definitely check out that group, and definitely check out the KMT website. Look at some of their other products and see if they're right for you. I think for me, I'm definitely going to continue to play with this machine and get better at my Jambpeg cutting. So if you are also one of those Jambpeg lovers or Jambpeg wannabes, then join me on future adventures. I hope to check out some of the other Jambpeg machines that are on offer. And maybe after we've seen a few, we can put some head-to-head comparisons together and see if there's one machine that rules them all. But as of today, this is the first time I've had one to take home and use with my own gear, and I do really like it a lot. So thank you to KMT for sending the machine, and thanks to you guys for watching the video. This has been Justin K. Prim right here on the Gem Cutter's Craft, and I will see you guys next time. Happy cutting.